what you're now starting to see in our politics is the reinvigoration of black families with younger black men and black women. And that is also helping to breed the revival of a black middle class in America. You see, during Jim Crow, the black family was together.
That's right.
One of the biggest debates in American politics right now isn't just about Donald Trump or Joe Biden. It's about why more black voters, particularly black men, appear to be moving toward the Republican Party. That's exactly what this discussion is about. Congressman Byron Donalds found himself under fire after comments he made to black voters in Philadelphia were criticized and, according to him, taken out of context. The conversation quickly turned into a heated debate over Jim Crow, Lyndon B. Johnson's Great Society programs, the war on drugs, black families, and whether today's economic policies are actually helping working-class Americans. Now, if you're new here, I'm Bradley Hostin, and this is The Bradley Hostin Show. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more news commentaries. I need you guys to stick around until the very end because after we watch this clip, I want to explain why I think both Republicans and Democrats continue talking past each other whenever these conversations about race and history come up. As usual, let's watch the clip, and then I'll give you guys my thoughts afterwards.
Good evening, I'm Abby Phillip in New York, and I want to get right to it tonight. One of Donald Trump's vice presidential contenders, Congressman Byron Donalds, he made some comments that has a lot of you talking and a lot of Democrats fired up. I'm going to speak with him live in just a couple of minutes, but here are the original remarks. They were made as a part of a pitch to black voters in Philadelphia, and I want you to hear it in its full context. Listen.
I grew up with my mom. My dad and my mom, things didn't work out. As an adult, I look at my father and I say, bro, I don't know what happened, but you my father and I love you.
Wow.
I don't know what happened. I wasn't there.
Wow.
But I'm gonna tell you this, growing up, the one thing I knew I wanted to do, and this is not about my father, this is about what I wanted to do, is I wanted to be a father to myself.
Wow.
And so one of the things that's actually happening in our culture, which you're now starting to see in our politics, is the reinvigoration of black families with younger black men and black women. And that is also helping to breed the revival of a black middle class in America. You see, during Jim Crow, the black family was together.
That's right.
During Jim Crow, more black people were not just conservative, because black people always have been conservative-minded, but more black people voted conservatively. And then HEW, Lyndon Johnson, and then you go down that road, and now we are where we are. What's happened in America the last 10 years, and I say it because it's my contemporaries, it's Wesley's contemporaries, you're starting to see more black people be married in homes, raising kids. It's when you home with your wife raising your kids, and then you look at the world, you're saying, now wait a minute, time out. This does not look right. How can I get something to my kids? It goes back to the conversation of generational wealth. Not just having a job, generational wealth.
Now, we should note that many Democrats who jumped on Donalds today claimed that he said that blacks were, quote, better off. As you heard there, he didn't use those exact words in the clip, but the congressman joins me now to talk about that. Congressman, thank you for being here. I want to just focus on really the substance of what you were saying or trying to say in that clip. What did you mean by black families were more together during Jim Crow?
Frankly, what that is about the empirical fact that before the Great Society, before Lyndon Johnson's policies, there was more black families united. The marriage rate in black America was significantly higher before the Great Society. The period of time that coincides with that, obviously, is Jim Crow era. And then after the Great Society, the marriage rate in the black community plummeted significantly. The Great Society is a part of that reason, not completely, but it's definitely a part of that. And what you're seeing right now in America is a reformation of black families in America. That's a good thing, not only for the black community and for black families, but it's also a good thing for the country.
So what was the point of tying together the black family and Jim Crow specifically? I mean, Jim Crow, as you know, was a period of racial segregation, of racial terror. Why would you make that connection?
All I was doing was referring to the time periods when you talk about the historical timelines in America and coinciding with black families and what the marriage rate in black families are. The overarching point is obviously talking about what polling shows today, that about 25% of the black vote, depending on what poll you're looking at, is leaning towards supporting Republicans and supporting President Trump. The corollary to that is that when you're in a family unit, husband and wife, living together, working together, thriving together, you're raising your kids, your thought process is now talking about building generational wealth. What am I leaving to my children? What kind of communities do I want my children to come up in? What are the educational opportunities? What's going on with the economy? How does, and then to a broader level, how does foreign policy and all these other public policy issues flow into that? And so when you compare the terrible agenda of Joe Biden and what that's done to families in America, coinciding with the fact that you are seeing a reformation of black families in America today, which is an absolutely wonderful thing and needs to continue. My view is it also coincides with a more conservative leaning and a more conservative mindset politically in those families.
One thing I really want to just get you to address is there were a lot of people who heard what you had to say, and a lot of them are offended by the idea that you would repeat Jim Crow 3 times in your comments as if to suggest that that was a time period because that black families were, in your words, together, because, in your words, black people were not just more conservative, they voted more conservatively. That's a good thing. I mean, it sounds like nostalgia. Do you regret using that time frame as a reference?
Nobody ever made nostalgia. That was never the point. It wasn't even about that. So where now I'm going to get my backup is I didn't say that. I didn't even insinuate that. That is where the media and yes, Hakeem Jeffries and a lot of other people are taking
What
it.
exactly didn't you
No,
insinuate?
back up.
I'm just trying to understand what you're saying. What didn't you insinuate?
The premise of your question, I did not insinuate. That is what people are trying to weave into what I said. What I said is crystal clear. It's on my social media. Go to @Byron Donalds on X. You can see the full clip. Abby, I appreciate you playing the full clip. What you are dealing with right now is a political environment where now anything I might say or any major surrogate might say is going to be twisted into the lens of race. That was never the point, not the idea whatsoever.
I mean, just to clarify my questioning of you,
Sure.
I mean, I understand that this idea that you said it was better, you didn't use the words better. But when you talk about that time period, you're suggesting that because the black family was together, they were better off than they are now.
See, this is the problem, Abby.
So are you saying that that's not the case? That the black family was not better off when they were, in your words, together?
Abby, let me put it to you like this.
In the Jim Crow era.
Let's agree on something. I am, obviously one of the better communicators in the Republican Party. I know how to put words together. I do it very, very often. So I'm not going to say something that I do not agree with. What America is seeing right now, especially Black America, is the gaslighting that unfortunately does happen in politics, where you take my comments and you want to weave your own political viewpoint into what I said. What I said is very clear.
I asked you to explain because I wanted to. What I want to undo is understand what you're saying here. Because if you're making a comparison, you're saying the black family was together then, they're not together now, and you're using that to try to say that things are bad now. Well, first of all, let me just to set the table here. By pretty much every available measure, black families, black individuals in this country are better off today than they were during Jim Crow. Would you agree with that?
Abby, of course I would. I'm not making that point, and this is the problem. What the Democrats, what Hakeem Jeffries did on the House floor, what Jamie Harrison, what the president of the NAACP, what the Biden campaign, because they're the ones who started this. It was really the Biden campaigns who were trying to cherry pick everything. they're trying to twist my words into saying something. I never said that. What I was talking about was specifically black families. And the point that black families being together is a great thing for the black community. And you do have to acknowledge the empirical fact that before Lyndon Johnson's policies and the welfare state that was created in the United States, I'm not talking about good, bad, or indifferent.
what about,
black families were, black marriage rates were significantly higher.
Well, what
They're
about other
rising
things that
again
might
in
have,
America.
but,
That's a good
but
thing.
What
We should
about other
celebrate
things
that.
that may have contributed to the, maybe the decline in marriage rates, which, by the way, is not unique to black families. That's happening actually across racial groups. But what about other things? I mean, what about redlining? Do you think that that had an effect on the black family? What about mass incarceration? What about the war on drugs, which was pushed by a Republican president whose advisor said it was specifically to target black people? What about all of those things?
Look, if you want to talk about redlining and a lot of the other policies that were put forward, quite frankly, by the Democrat Party, if you're going to go back to Jim Crow, because Jim Crow was Democrat policies.
Well,
that's what that was.
I know that
Come on, Abby, don't cut me off when I'm trying to make a point.
Let me just,
Abby.
I have to correct on a factual point here. I know that you know that the Democratic Party and the Republican Party of today are ideologically not what they were during Jim Crow. You know that, Congressman. So to suggest that, the Democrats of 1920 are the same ideologically as the Democrats of today is inaccurate. So just, you can continue, but I wanted to...
That's not totally true, Abby, and I think if we want to have that conversation about the policy positions between Republicans and Democrats, we can have that conversation, but
one of the other
Abby, do you want to have a conversation?
One of the other things,
I'm trying to understand how you want this interview to go.
Since you brought it up on the conservative thing, the other thing that you said was black people voted more conservatively. Were you talking about them voting for Republicans?
In part, yeah, because that's just an empirical fact. That's what we know. That did happen. And the only corollary that I am making is that when families are together and now you're trying to find a way for you to build wealth within your family unit, you're thinking about public policy in a myriad of ways. Because at the end of the day, you want your children to be able to stand on your shoulders. I was very, very fortunate. My mother was able to build a platform for me to be able to stand on and to be able to achieve. Same for my sisters. I'm a very blessed individual because of that. My only point is that when you have a family unit, husband and wife living together, striving together, grinding together, raising children together, you start thinking about public policy in a myriad of ways. And my belief is that dynamic allows people to start thinking about public policy in a much more conservative way as opposed to a much more progressive way. That's my point.
That might be, I mean, I think you're a Republican, so you're entitled to that opinion. But I think what people are taking issue with is you made a couple of statements of fact. And one of the things I was asking you about whether you were talking about black people voting for Republicans. In the time period that you're talking about, the LBJ time period, they started voting for Democrats. And the reason is because of civil rights, because a Democratic president was passing bills that gave them rights. The Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act of 1965, the Housing Fairness Act. So do you acknowledge that when Democrats black voters vote for Democrats, it's actually because there's a history there. There's a reason that they voted for Democrats in that time period, not because they were just getting welfare money.
Abby, let me be clear. I don't deny that. I think it's also important for the record to be clear that you had the vast majority of Democrats in the Senate were filibustering the 64 Civil Rights Act led by Robert Byrd, who, by the way, was a mentor to Joe Biden when he went into the United States Senate. So if we're going to talk about the history, let's talk about it clearly and completely. Republicans have been the ones who were pushing not just the 64 Civil Rights Act, but the other 4 Civil Rights Acts that occurred before 1964. That's the history of the country. I'm not denying that.
Southern Democrats who opposed.
Can I finish my point? All I'm asking is to finish my point.
On the facts here, there were Southern Democrats who opposed these civil rights bills. But a majority of them voted for it. It was also led by a Democratic president. So you acknowledge that Southern Democrats were recruited into the Republican Party in the time period after that. So when you talk about this, you just have to acknowledge that there's been a switch happening in the two parties. It's not the same today as it was during Jim Crow. And so when you say that
Abby?
Black people voted conservatively, that actually doesn't really tell us anything. It just tells us that they
Abby.
voted for the Republican Party, which is a different thing than it is for today.
Are we also going to acknowledge that how the 64 Civil Rights Act actually got through the U.S. Senate was because of also the leadership of Senator Everett Dirksen, who was the minority Republican leader in the United States Senate at that time.
Absolutely.
You have to acknowledge that. So I think if we're going to talk about this, we have to acknowledge all of the history that went along with it.
I wasn't suggesting
and I think that's a good thing. We should have that historical conversation.
I wasn't suggesting that congressional Republicans necessarily were the stumbling block for any of this legislation. All I'm saying is that when you ask, why do Black people vote for Democrats, you have to acknowledge that that is one of the main reasons. I want to just ask one other thing, though, Congressman. It's striking to me that this conversation about the family, about who is the recipient of government benefits, about who was affected by Lyndon B. Johnson's Great Society, why is it that that conversation only happens to Black people? When white people are on welfare, when white people are recipients of these programs too, when white people have broken families as well, why is this a message that is always directed at Black Americans?
I didn't say that at all. I think that's what you're insinuating. But let me. I
mean, that's what you did. You were trying to recruit Black voters
Abby,
for President Trump.
Am I allowed to answer the question? Let me step into that. Okay, a couple of things. Yes, Lyndon Johnson's Great Society, if you look at the empirical data, was destructive in part, and I said even in my comments yesterday in Philadelphia, in part to Black families throughout the United States of America. You also had some of the very damaging policies around the criminal justice system. The 94 crime bill, which was authored by Joe Biden and brought by Joe Biden. Yes, you had the war on drugs that was also very damaging to Black communities. All those things have contributed to that. And where we are today in America is trying to have the economic policies and the public policies so that all people can thrive. And if you're actually going to compare economic policies and public policies between the 45th president and the 46th president, it's without question they were better under the 45th.
Well, look, I mean,
so if you're going to examine today,
Abby,
if you're going to examine today in America and
again,
where we're going as Americans, then you have to have the right set of economic policies and the right set of public policies. I mean, Abby, you've been interrupting me the entire interview. I'm just trying to have a conversation.
I'm going to interrupt you on the facts, Congressman. The Black unemployment rate was the lowest in American history under Joe Biden just last year. The poverty rate for Black people is the lowest under Joe Biden. So you cannot say empirically for Black people that from a financial level, things were better under Trump. There are other ways that you can make this case, but you cannot say that.
Actually, let me respond to that. Because the economic reality is that even though unemployment might be lower, wages adjusted for inflation, which is the true measure of getting ahead in America, that has been bad under Joe Biden. It was significantly better under Donald Trump because we did not have massive inflation and people were making more money, which means you're taking more money home, which means you can begin to prepare for your family, which means you can start to prepare and begin thinking about ideas of getting assets, accumulating assets, and generating wealth. Joe Biden's economy, Bidenomics, like he likes to call it, I know they don't using the word anymore, that's been destructive of so many families in our country, including Black families in our country. That is the empirical economic fact that we have to acknowledge before this election
inflation,
cycle.
I 100% agree with you, is a problem for all families, including maybe even especially Black families. But you also cannot ignore that there are a lot of statistics that suggest that Black Americans are doing well under Joe Biden, better than they were doing under Donald Trump. I want to ask you one last thing, because I know that this is actually happening as we're talking. We've learned that you are on the list, obviously, for VP candidates, and that you've received some vetting materials from the Trump campaign to be potentially a VP. Can you confirm that? And is there anything more you can tell us about how that process is going?
Well, I'm not going to confirm that right now. I had a conversation with the Trump campaign about that, and I'm going to leave that very private because they're going to go through their deliberations. President Trump's going to make a decision. I will say, Prices in America have been up over 20% since Joe Biden has taken office. That's hurting everybody. When prices are up 20%, trust me, Abby, going to the supermarket, going to the gas station, everybody is struggling. That is a fact. And that is why so many Americans, especially Americans who are minorities in this country, are leaving Joe Biden and the Democrats and looking towards Donald Trump and the Republicans.
All right. Congressman Byron Donalds, we appreciate you joining us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
So let me give you guys my thoughts because there were several things that stood out to me in that discussion. First of all, I think this debate shows how difficult it has become to have honest conversations about race, history, and public policy without people immediately assuming the worst about one another. From what I could gather, Byron Donalds was trying to make a broader argument about family structure, economic opportunity, and how government policies have affected black communities over time. His critics, however, interpreted some of his comments as sounding nostalgic for a period in American history that included Jim Crow segregation, and that's why the reaction became so intense. Those are two very different conversations. The second thing that stood out to me was how quickly the discussion shifted from the original point to debating decades of political history. There were references to Lyndon B. Johnson's Great Society, the Civil Rights Act, the war on drugs, and which political party bears more responsibility for the challenges facing black communities today. Those are important issues, but they're also incredibly complicated. Reducing them to a few television sound bites doesn't do justice to the history or to the people affected by those policies. Finally, I think this conversation reflects a much bigger political reality. Both parties are competing hard for black voters, especially as polling suggests that some black voters are becoming more open to voting Republican than in previous elections. That makes these debates more intense because every statement is viewed through a political lens. At the end of the day, I think voters care less about who wins the argument on television and more about which policies will actually improve their lives, create better opportunities, strengthen families, and make it easier to build wealth for the next generation. Those are the conversations that deserve the most attention, but those are just my thoughts. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Do you think Byron Donalds' comments were taken out of context, or do you think the criticism he received was justified? And if you're still watching, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more news commentaries. I'll see you guys in the next one.